Holyrood by Ruth Davidson taking quite a striding tone, saying that this was simply a holding document, that business wasn't getting enough clarity, that people were being told to tune back in 3 weeks' time to find out what was happening. But the First Minister's point, which we've heard echoed by our guest today, is it's more damaging potentially to try and open things up again, find out you did it too fast, and then have to rein things in once again. Both the Scottish and UK governments are adamant in their aims that, well, this lockdown finishes, it must be the last lockdown. And here's the First Minister now at St Andrew's House.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us. Let me give the usual update on today's statistics. 798 positive cases were reported yesterday, which is 3.9% of the total number of tests and takes the overall number of confirmed cases to 199,637. 1,018 people are currently in hospital, 58 fewer than yesterday. 93 people are in intensive care, which is the same as yesterday. And I'm sorry to say that 47 additional deaths were registered in the past 24 hours. And that takes the total number of deaths registered under that measurement to 7,053. National Records of Scotland has also just published its weekly update. That includes cases where COVID is a suspected or contributory cause of death, in addition to deaths where COVID is confirmed through a test. Today's update shows that by Sunday, the total number of registered deaths linked to COVID under the wider definition was 9,347. 290 of those deaths were registered in the past week. That's 35 fewer than in the previous week. And of those deaths, 235 occurred in hospitals, 34 in care homes, one occurred in another institutional setting, and 20 occurred in people's homes or in non-institutional settings. Care home deaths have now fallen by 69% in the past 4 weeks. And in the most recent week, they accounted for just 12%, in fact, just under 12% of the overall number of deaths from COVID. And that is, with 1 week's exception, the lowest proportion recorded in any week since the very start of the pandemic. And that obviously provides further evidence, and extremely welcome evidence, that vaccination is already reducing the number of people dying from COVID, particularly the most vulnerable people in our care homes. That said, the virus, as we can see from today's report, is still causing heartbreak on a daily basis to families across the country. So again, I want to send my condolences to everybody who is grieving. Turning now to the update on the vaccination programme. As of this morning, 1,488,077 people have now received a first dose. That's an increase of 22,836 since yesterday. In addition, 6,918 people yesterday received the second dose, meaning that a total yesterday of 29,754 vaccinations were administered. 84% of 65 to 69-year-olds have now received a first dose, which means that we are well on course to offer the first dose to everybody in that age group by early March. And as I confirmed yesterday, we now expect to be able to offer a first dose to everybody over the age of 50 and to all adults with an underlying health condition by the 15th of April, which is earlier than our previous estimate of when we would complete all in those categories. Now, I'm joined today by Jason Leach, who will help me answer questions shortly. Before then, I want to cover 2 points. The first is adult care home visiting, which I know is hugely important to many people across the country, and the inability to visit loved ones in care homes has been the source of anxiety, distress and real trauma for people over the past year. We're publishing today new guidance on how friends and family can start to visit residents in care homes again. The guidance recommends that from the start of March onwards, all care homes that should support residents to have up to 2 designated visitors each. Now, that might not sound like much, and we obviously hope to get back to even more normality in the weeks to come. But I know for many across the country, even that is a big step back to a more normal way of life. It's not a complete return to normal yet, because there will still be a lot of COVID safety measures in place, face coverings, rigorous hygiene, and the availability of testing. But it is nevertheless a really important move forward. And having listened to the views of those who have family in care homes, I know that it is a change that has been much longed for and will be cherished by many. People who've not been able to properly be with or care for their loved ones during the pandemic. The change has, of course, been made possible in large part, in very large part, because of the exceptionally high uptake of vaccines in care homes. And we believe, therefore, that with additional safeguards in place that I've already mentioned, this is now the time to take that step. Obviously, we want to see care home visiting restart as quickly as possible across all care home groups. So we are currently speaking with all groups to understand and address any concerns that they might have. And we will also work with care homes to safely increase the frequency with which people can visit. Very grateful to everyone in the care home sector who has worked with us to make the resumption of visiting possible. And I want to say a big thank you to those working in care homes who've had a very torrid time over the past year, but who have also, during the past year, gone the extra mile to try to fill the gap that has been left in many residents' lives by the absence of visits from their own family over the past year. And I know there will be families across the country that are deeply grateful to all of you for doing that. Now, the other issue I want to address today is the update to the strategic framework that we published yesterday. And let me say at the outset that I know how desperate everyone is, people, businesses, everybody across the country is for more certainty and to be able to see as far ahead into the future with as much clarity as possible. So I'll say a little bit about why I don't think it's right or possible to do everything that we all desperately want at the moment, but also a bit about how we intend to get to that longer term position as quickly as possible. The framework provides indicative dates for the next 6 weeks because that's the time frame that right now we can be most confident about. It's harder at this stage, this will change as we go through the coming weeks, but at this stage it's harder to know the likely course of the pandemic after that period. And the main reason for that is that we don't yet know how the new, more infectious variant of the virus will behave as we start to lift the lockdown restrictions. Because it is only the restrictions that are keeping that at bay right now. So what that means is that we have to monitor the first few steps out of lockdown we take very carefully so that we are building our confidence about the speed at which we are able to go. Over the next couple of weeks, that means looking particularly closely at the impact of the first phase of school return that started on Monday and at the impact of the next phase of school return that will happen on the 15th of March, when we hope to get as many more young people as possible back to school. And my hope is that the more we learn about the impact of the early changes, the more confidence we will then have that we can go further and faster without risking a resurgence of the virus that would set us all back. In the meantime, though, we will move forward carefully, but over the period between now and the start of April, we will move forward. We will support the full return of schools with as many pupils, as I just said, as possible back on the 15th of March. We will also support the return of care home visiting that I have just spoken about. We will let young people return to outdoor sports to help their mental health and to give them the chance to be with friends. We will let communal worship reopen, and let me be clear, I clarified this in Parliament yesterday, but not everybody would have heard that. Let me be clear, we intend to allow that reopening of communal worship in time for the Easter weekend and for Passover. And we will lift the stay-at-home restriction at the start of April, which compares, I think, to a target date for England of the very end of March, so not much difference there. And we will also reopen some parts of retail. So that's what we can reasonably be confident about doing between now and the start of April. There's always caveats in that because we can't be absolutely certain about what's going to happen with the virus, but we have a reasonable degree of confidence in that 6-week time frame. And if we become confident over the next few weeks that we can do more, then we will do more. And then from the last week in April on current planning, the expectation is that the rest of retail will start to reopen, as will holiday accommodation, hospitality, gyms and hairdressers, for example. And on that last one, as you can probably see, I'm as desperate as anybody to see hairdressers open. Now, that will involve, at that stage, all of Scotland going down to at least level 3, but there might be parts of the country at that stage, perhaps more rural communities, that are able to go straight to level 2, meaning the opening up can happen faster. And of course, all parts of Scotland, we hope, will be able to move to lower levels of restrictions fairly quickly over May and June. Now, again, all of this is cautious because we don't yet know exactly what will happen with the new variant when we do start to open up. But as we get a better handle on that, we will move faster if we can. And the factor that may open the way for us to move further and faster is greater confidence about the impact that vaccination is having on transmission. That is absolutely the area where we have every reason right now to be really optimistic. Now, inevitably and understandably, and this has been the case since almost day one of the pandemic, comparisons are made with what's happening in England. Sometimes people want us to follow what's happening in England, sometimes people don't. My view has always been that what we should try to do, in fact, what my duty as First Minister is to do, is just to try our hardest to get it right for Scotland. That's what we've done in schools, for example. So right now we have some children back to school already. That's not yet the case in England. But 2 other points. Our approach here is not an outlier. It's broadly in line, although there are differences with Wales and Northern Ireland. And in terms of reopening the economy, the plans we set out yesterday are roughly 2 weeks behind the plans for England. But it's worth pointing out that last year, as we came out of lockdown, the dates we set out then were also a little bit behind England. And that caused the same understandable frustrations in some quarters. But looking back, our approach enabled more of the country to remain open and trading for longer before new restrictions became necessary. So that underlines what I really strongly feel must be the priority now, getting to a sustainable position that protects people's lives and protects the NHS, but also gives people in business the opportunity to rebuild and recover without, hopefully, facing further shutdowns in the future. Now, the final thing I know people want to hear is the end date for all of this. When will it all be over so that we can do all the things we all miss doing? I desperately want that too, and I am more confident with every day that passes that we're getting closer to that. The emerging evidence makes me more hopeful than ever that the days of being able to hug loved ones and socialise on a normal or a close to normal basis might not be too far away. And the reason for that confidence is, as I said a moment ago, the emerging evidence on vaccination. But in terms of being able to put a hard and fast specific date on that right now, it would certainly make my life a lot easier to do that, or at least it would make my life easier in the short term. I'm not sure it would make it easier if I had to tell you later on that I'd got it wrong. And that's the point. If I was to give you a fixed, hard and fast date right now, I would pretty much be making it up. And I don't think that's the approach I should take with you. So I'm not ruling out any specific dates. I want it to be as soon as possible, and we have every reason to be hopeful that come the summer, life will be much, much, much better than it is just now. But when I stand here and give you what I think the actual date when all or most restrictions will come to an end is going to be, I want to be as sure as I can be that that is real and that it can be delivered. So I don't just understand the frustrations that people have, I feel those frustrations. As has been the case all along, I'll have to take decisions that sometimes you agree with and sometimes you disagree with. But I can assure you that the Scottish Government will continue to do our very best to lead the country as quickly, but also as safely and as sustainably through this horrible ordeal and out the other side of it. But one thing, and this is my final point, that I know beyond any doubt, is that the more we all stick with this now, keeping the virus suppressed, getting it more suppressed while the vaccination does its work, then the faster that day when we get out the other end of this will be. So for now, difficult though I really know it is, please for now stay home and follow all the other guidance, because that is what is working right now, and that is what is bringing that day when we're out of this pandemic that bit closer. Thank you very much for listening. At the moment, we're going to move now to questions. Jason obviously will help me with the questions, but first of all, today, can I go to Douglas Fraser at the BBC? Douglas, are you with us? Okay, I'll maybe try Douglas.
Hello.
Oh, sorry, hi.
Hello?
Hello.
Can you get me now?
Yes.
It's a familiar scenario. Right. And thank you. Good afternoon to both of you. Two questions, one to each of you, if you don't mind. First of all, hoteliers say that there's dismay, confusion, anger at your roadmap, and its lack of clarity for the tourism sector in particular. Travel agents say that they feel a door's been slammed in their face. The Scottish Tourism Alliance says it doesn't let them plan for reopening, so they'll lose bookings to other parts of the UK where customers have been given more confidence to book. Now, they recognise, I think all of these groups, that the data may push back any dates that are given, but they're asking at least for a signal that they can plan on, that customers can plan on to book with. Would you take this opportunity to give at least a signal that what happens after April is something that they can plan on, and whether level 3 will have fewer constraints on restaurants and pubs than it did last year? And if you don't mind, a question for Professor Leach. This is about another subject you've been talking about this morning, in care home visiting. There is a care home group, Barchester Care Homes, has written to relatives suggesting they may have to be vaccinated before being allowed indoor visits. Now, we're told that many younger relatives are very disappointed by this, as they could have to wait much longer. What's your reaction to that? Is there a hope that there might be an exception?
Okay, I'll hand over to Jason in a second. I will do what I've always done. People can agree or disagree with it. That's perfectly appropriate. And that is give as much clarity as I can give, as early as I can give it. What I'm going to try not to do, because I don't think it's fair to people in the greater scheme of things, is to give false clarity, just to make these experiences for me easier, because I can say what people want to hear. And that's a discipline that I've tried to stick to, and I'm going to continue to try to stick to it. But in terms of the ability to plan, as I said yesterday and I've repeated today, businesses, I think, should plan that from the 26th of April, those parts of the economy, hospitality, hotel and tourist accommodation, retail, the retail that won't have opened earlier, hairdressers, gyms, can start to reopen. And over the earlier part of March, the first half of March, we will try to give more specific information about exactly when and how and in what sequence that will be, as the information we have from these first changes we're making becomes a bit clearer. In terms of the questions about level 3, I'd make 2 points about that. Firstly, yes, I said this in Parliament yesterday, we are looking at the contents of the levels to see whether some of the concerns, and I think hospitality is at the top of this list, that were expressed the last time we were in levels about some of the restrictions and whether they could be recast to have the same effect on suppression of the virus but make life easier for businesses, whether they are possible. And yes, we are actively doing that, and we'll talk to sectors about that. But the other point I'd make about level 3 is, and again I indicated this yesterday and again today, it may be by the time we get to the 26th of April we have greater confidence in where we are in the fight against the virus, that some parts of the country can go straight to level 2. And hopefully we might see the whole country go to level 2 in the not too distant future after the 26th of April. This is about getting back to normal and getting opened as quickly as possible. But the key thing, the key point I would make here, which I tried to make in my opening remarks, is that in some ways the experience now of coming out of lockdown, and many of these frustrations we went through last summer as well, in some ways the experience is the same, and the difficulties and the frustrations and the balancing acts we've got to strike are the same. But there's two things that are different, and we've been very upfront about this. The first is we have made a very deliberate policy decision that I think has broad consensus, is that the first thing we want to get back to normal is schools. And we started that process, I'm glad to say, on Monday, and we just need to give ourselves a bit of time to understand, is that going to have an impact on the virus? And that leads to the second point, because why there is greater uncertainty about that right now, and this is what is also different from last year, is that the virus we are living with right now, more than 80%, more than 85% of all cases now are of the new variant, is different in precise nature to the virus we were living with when we came out of lockdown last time. It transmits much more quickly. So we don't yet know, because we haven't lived with this virus without restrictions up until now, just exactly what's going to happen when we start to lift those restrictions. So at the moment, that just demands, I think, if we're being responsible, a bit of caution. A couple of weeks from now, we might have much greater confidence that we can live with this, even this new variant, and be sure what we can afford to do, and that gives us greater clarity. So I know this is frustrating, but it's not for no reason. The last thing I want to do right now is get us into a position where we start moving before we have the confidence to do that, and then a month or 2 months from now, because the easing up against this new virus has happened more quickly than the vaccination programme has been able to protect us, we end up having to slam on the brakes again and reimpose lockdown restrictions that we have lifted. So it's really frustrating for all of us right now. This period in particular is difficult, but taking the time now will give us that certainty and that confidence that when we are opening up, we're able to do it on a sustainable basis. Jason, do you want to address the care home point?
Yeah, the Barchester Care Home Group, which is a UK-wide group of care home provider, and they have written to relatives to say they require vaccination before they can do our version of that visiting. I'm disappointed with that response from Barchester. The Cabinet Secretary for Health met with them last week, as she did with a number of the larger providers in Scotland, to outline our 9 layers of protection that will now be in place as we think about moving to, I think, what is an essential positive step for care homes. And the Cabinet Secretary has today written back to Barchester, just before I came down. I haven't had a chance to read the letter in its entirety, offering them another meeting to discuss this. The fundamental challenge here is one of equity. Of course we want the residents to be safe and those who visit to be safe. Our expert group has decided the layers of protection we have in place, which is pretty much 100% vaccination of residents, along with PPE, testing, all the other things we know about hand washing, is enough for this level of visiting to come back. So we are collectively disappointed with that approach, and we're going to try and talk to them to get them to change their mind.
Peter McMahon from ITV Border.
Thank you very much, First Minister. If I could follow up from Douglas Fraser's question. The Association of Scottish Self-Caterers have said that you yesterday failed to provide clarity and detail and certainty for their industry, which is particularly important for the south of Scotland. The same applies for hospitality, for example. They also say that even at the end of April, if levels are going down to level 3, that will mean people can't move within local authority areas in Scotland. You couldn't go from Glasgow to Dumfries or from Edinburgh to the Scottish borders, and there's no sign of relaxing the restrictions between Scotland and England. So can you give them any further hope for what they say is a vital industry, provides a lot of employment and is very important in the south of Scotland?
Look, every single question today could be a question, and all perfectly understandable and legitimate questions from a different sector asking effectively the same question. I am and will continue to give as much clarity as I can as quickly as possible. And there's no motivation for me to try to withhold clarity or certainty when I think I can give it. But what I don't want to do is give clarity and certainty that is on a false basis, because I don't have the objective grounding and assessment to allow me to do that. And I know that's frustrating, and I cast my mind back, and I'm sure if we were to play some of the sessions that we will have today or in the days ahead and compare them to similar sessions last summer, they would be almost identical, because we faced all these questions. And if I look back last year, I think when we were being pressed and criticised to go further and faster, I think broadly we made the right decision to go at the pace we did. And actually, if I look back last year and think where we got it wrong, it probably was in some respects going a bit faster than we should have done. And therefore, as we came into the winter, we weren't in a sustainable enough position to avoid another lockdown. So, and that was on the old variant of the virus. We now face one that is even more infectious. So if I have to give, whether it's self-catering, the wider tourist industry, hospitality, any sector of the economy, the certainty that opening up is sustainable, we just need to have the solid basis for that. Now, we're giving the indication that sectors should start planning for that reopening from the 26th of April as our understanding of opening schools and starting to ease restrictions develops over the next couple of weeks, if we can bring that forward, we will. But what I don't want to be doing is giving people false dawns and false starts. I faced a question in Parliament yesterday, I think, in the context of care homes, so it's a different context, about and I think it was from Willie Rennie of the Liberals, about repeated false dawns for care home openings. And I think there's opening of care home visiting. And I think there's a reasonable validity to that. And I think it's really important that we're not giving people false dawns here. When we say to people, you can open, there's never 100% certainty against an infectious virus, but when we get to the point where we're giving people certainty about fixed dates, then we have a reasonable degree of confidence that we can meet that, and that's what we're going to try to do. I hope everything I set out yesterday can be accelerated. I hope it happens quicker, but we have to make sure it happens sustainably. Ross Govins from STV.
Afternoon, First Minister. Just briefly, again, returning to the level system, should businesses across the country prepare themselves to operate under some form of levels for a prolonged period of time? And they say that will put themselves at a disadvantage to potentially other businesses, similar businesses across the UK, who potentially won't be from June. And briefly on the vaccine rollout as well, as expected, there has been a fall in numbers receiving the JAG this week. Are you now satisfied that the issues that have resulted in this have been rectified and that will continue to ramp up over the next few weeks?
I think as supply of the vaccine picks up again, as we always predicted it would, we predicted that we would have a dip over these last couple of weeks. That has been the case, and that's reflected in our daily figures. I think if you look at the daily figures in other parts of the UK, you see that dip reflected there as well. The numbers on a day-to-day basis will fluctuate, but I think you can see that dip overall. We're confident that will ramp up again in the weeks to come. On the first part of your question, then, my apologies to Peter McMahon. Actually, I omitted to answer part of his question, which I've just remembered. I hope that we can get to a position as we go into that period from the end of April onwards on our current planning, that's the time frame, when we can also start to lift restrictions on travel within Scotland. And that's why I'm making the point that we hope that some parts of the country might be able to go straight to level 2 and all of the country might be able to go straight to level 2. I think the travel restrictions that are more likely to be in place for longer are international travel restrictions because of the dangers of importing the virus. I don't expect us in our opening up to be significantly behind England. I think in terms of what we set out so far, it puts us, as I said earlier on, roughly 2 weeks behind. That gap might close, they might slow down a bit, or we might speed up a bit. But that 2 weeks is roughly the pattern we followed last summer. And I actually think that put us last summer, not obviously in a completely sustainable position because we had another lockdown, but actually we managed to stay open for longer. So it's not that I think by the time we get to a point where England is definitely ending all restrictions, that Scotland will be massively behind. There would be no real reason for that. The difference is I don't feel that I can stand here. Maybe the Prime Minister knows things I don't, but I think that's unlikely in relation to the virus. I don't think I could stand here right now and say the 21st of June with any certainty. I literally would be making it up. And I don't think that's fair. I'd love to think it was the 21st of June, and if we all want to circle that in our calendar as an aspiration to aim for, I'm not saying don't do that, but I can't stand here and look at that camera and say that I've got advice that tells me that that is something I can say with certainty. But if by then England is able to deliver that, I can't see that Scotland will be much behind that. The difference here is how far out I feel comfortable in giving you assurances. Now, the Prime Minister can make his own judgments on that, but I'm trying to be as clear and as frank with people about what I do know and what I still don't know, and that is the position that I am taking. Do you want to add anything on vaccine?
I was going to add what the document doesn't say. I think perhaps the 94 pages haven't been studied by everybody, and I wouldn't expect everybody to read the 94 pages. It doesn't say that the level system will be just by local authority. It says it might be groups of local authorities. It doesn't say that the travel restrictions will stay in place as they were before. It might be different. It doesn't say that the levels will be exactly as they were the last time. All of that will depend on the data. All of that will depend on the advice we give the decision makers about where we are with the weeks from now until then. And the way to get to the 26th of April and move to level 2 is to get the prevalence down. It's as straightforward as that. And I cannot predict what will then happen in May and June, because nobody knows how the new variant reacts to opening schools or opening other bits of the economy. Nobody has done it anywhere in the world. So we have to go in 3 weeks, because that's the incubation period and a half for this virus, and we will monitor that data just as tightly as we can and open when we think it's safe to do so. It does feel like the same conversations we had. I can't remember which month it was, but it feels like exactly the same conversation. The last time the UK had 1,300 admissions, which is what it had yesterday, was the 1st of May 2020. And you know what happened after the 1st of May 2020? It continued to fall very slowly, almost disappeared in the summer, and then it came back. That's what we're trying to avoid.
Thanks. James Matthews from Sky.
Thanks very much, First Minister. You spoke about not being able to give definitive dates, but of course the one definite date that you have stuck to is the 6th of May, Election Day. If you don't have the clarity and certainty to say what's safe beyond the end of April, with what clarity and certainty can you say it's safe to hold an election a week beyond April? And second of all, if I could read you a quote, there was discussion about the investigation, the process of it, the fact it was a civil service investigation being conducted by civil servants. That's an account from someone in discussion with you about the investigation into Alex Salmond in your office on March the 29th, 2018. Have they misremembered those details?
That's not an account that I would agree with. I can't speak for somebody else, and I don't know for sure, apart from what you've just told me, exactly whose account that is. But I hope that I'll be before the committee looking at these matters a week today. This is Wednesday, and I'll be able to answer all of these questions in full. I've waited a long time to do so before this committee, so I certainly welcome that opportunity, and I'll be questioned, I am sure, fully and in detail on all of these matters, and I look forward to giving my responses, answering all and any questions, and setting the record straight where I think that is required. So with that, I'm going to move back on to COVID, because this is a COVID briefing and there are other forums where quite properly and legitimately I will be questioned on these other matters. On the election, James, obviously there are things happening just now within the context of COVID, some children back at school, some parts of the economy open, where steps and measures have to be taken to keep them safe or as safe as possible, and that is how an election would proceed. There are many countries during the pandemic that have had elections, and I think democracy is important. But the issues on the election, I can state my view, which is that I think if we can allow the election to go forward on a safe basis, we should do that because of the importance of democracy. These are not just decisions for me. The Parliament has legislation in place that provides a framework for any decisions about the conduct of the election to take place. So I can only give my view. It would be for the Parliament acting on a cross-party basis to make any changes either to the date of the election or the conduct of the election in terms of whether it's there are changes to the arrangements by which it would happen. Peter Smith from ITV.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, First and Director. Every day you're coming here and you're asking the Scottish people to have faith in your message and to trust you. Now we hear some serious allegations from a former First Minister. This is not someone from the sidelines, a former First Minister who knows the democratic institutions of Scotland, and he's alleging that there is corruption that is undermining the trust that we can have in you and these institutions. You have said, clearly, show us your evidence. Alex Salmond says he would like to, but he's been blocked by the Crown Office. Can you say, has anyone in your government or your staff contacted the Crown Office asking them to censor or withhold vital evidence?
Again, I'll answer this question, albeit this is a COVID briefing, and then I'm going to move back to COVID. The decisions about what the Scottish Parliament publishes and how it publishes whatever it publishes in compliance with the law are matters for the Parliament, for the corporate body. I am not party to these discussions. And the decisions the Crown Office takes in relation to enforcing or upholding the law, and this relates specifically to your question, are taken independently by the Crown Office, independently of government. And any suggestion at all that these decisions are in any way politically influenced are downright wrong. But I would suggest that they go further than that, that they actually start to buy into what is a false and quite dangerous conspiracy theory that has no basis in fact. You refer to allegations made by Alex Salmond. I don't think there is a shred of evidence behind those allegations and the claims that have been made. But Alex Salmond has had the opportunity, today to be in front of the committee and to try to substantiate those allegations. Now, he's declined that opportunity today, I don't think with any good reason, and I hope he comes to the committee in early course so that he can say what he wants, put forward any claims that he wants, and crucially bring forward the evidence. In terms of the submission that the Parliament redacted yesterday, that relates to one part of the committee's inquiry. I don't think it inhibits the questioning of me. The allegations in relation to that part of the inquiry that Alex Salmond is making about me have been widely reported in the media and in the public domain. I have always and continued to be of the view that I will be fully questioned on all of these issues by the committee when I appear, hopefully a week today, fully and in detail. There's no reason why I shouldn't be, and I don't think there's any reason why Alex Salmond should not sit in front of that committee, make whatever claims he wants to make, say whatever he wants to say, and bring whatever evidence he thinks he has to bear. There was no conspiracy theory, and I sometimes think that the preference perhaps of Mr Salmond is to continue to make those claims without ever subjecting them to the proper scrutiny of the Parliamentary Committee looking into them. So I hope he proves me wrong on that by getting himself in front of the committee in early course. And then I look forward to appearing next week. Next week, I think, is the 6th date I've had in my diary to appear before this committee. Every one before now has been postponed by the committee, and the last few because Alex Salmond has not agreed to appear. So I want to get in front of this committee to answer every and all questions that people have of me, to address all the issues that people have, and to rebut, frankly, head on and very directly some of the wild, untrue, false and baseless claims that have been made in recent times. But for now, I'm going to get on with my job of leading the country through COVID, so I'll get back to that.
I appreciate that, First Minister. If I may just ask, though, is there a worry that this inquiry is losing credibility every day, and it is to the detriment of women who may now speak out against powerful men?
I do worry about not just the women in this case, whose voices have been silenced, whose motives have been maligned, who've been accused, or it seems to me to be accused of being liars and conspiracists, and I think that is wrong. They came forward with complaints. The behaviour they complained of was found by a jury not to constitute criminal conduct, and Alex Salmond is innocent of criminality, but that doesn't mean that the behaviour they claimed of didn't happen. And I think it's important that we don't lose sight of that. And when I've said that before, people have said, you're hiding behind the women. I'm not hiding behind anybody. If anything, I'm standing up for the right of women to come forward and for claims to be taken seriously. I can't speak for the conduct or the status or the standing or the credibility of the Parliamentary Committee. That's for the committee. And all I know is I've been waiting for months to appear before this committee and haven't yet had the opportunity. The one final point I would make, and then I am going to get back to COVID, is that this submission that's been in the news yesterday that had to have some redactions for legal reasons, that related to the aspect of the committee that is looking at whether or not I breached the ministerial code. There's actually a separate investigation into that being conducted by the independent advisor on the ministerial code. Now, my assumption is that the advisor has this submission in full because in its initial form, it was actually a letter to him. So he's looking at that without any redactions, I assume, and will be able to take all of that into account. So the idea that scrutiny of me is being inhibited in any way, shape or form is wrong. There is no reason why I can't sit before that committee, answer questions fully, in detail, openly, for as long as the committee wants. And frankly, there's no reason why Alex Salmond cannot do the same. So perhaps he should just get himself in front of it. We can both have our say. People can make up their own minds, and then I'll go on with my job of leading the country through the pandemic and hopefully out of the other end of it. Right, Anas Hassan from Kingdom FM.
Thank you, First Minister. And as it's my first televised coronavirus briefing in 2021, I'd like to wish you and the National Clinical Director a happy new year. First Minister and Professor Leitch, back in November, Fife went into level 3 restrictions, which means that by the time we potentially go back to the level system in late April, the Kingdom will have been in full or close to full lockdown for more than 5 months. And it's a similar position in other parts of Scotland. Firstly, what assessment has been made of the impact that the restrictions could have on mental well-being and isolation? And secondly, although there's no doubt the rules are important, how realistic is it to expect people to stick rigidly to the restrictions for such an extended period of time? Thank you.
Thanks. I'll hand over to Jason in a second, but that may be the latest time in the year I've ever been wished a Happy New Year. So let me reciprocate, Anas, and wish you a Happy New Year as well. At least we're not quite in March yet, and let's hope it is, even although it still doesn't feel like a much happier New Year to come later on. In terms of how we assess the different impacts, and you will have heard this and read it in all of our documents so far, we do, every time we review restrictions or consider easing or imposing restrictions, we do what's called a Foreharms Assessment. So we look at the harm of the virus, which is what we're trying to contain through restrictions, but we also look at the consequences the restrictions have, the harms that they do to the economy, to people's well-being and mental health in particular, and to other functions of the health service. And we try to balance all of that. That's not an easy balancing act. It's very difficult. And we know that we have to reach a balance in a way that keeps the virus suppressed, or it overwhelms everything. But all of these issues around mental health are taken into account, and it is for mental health reasons, amongst others, but it's quite close to the top of the list, that we're all keen to get out of these restrictions as quickly as possible, because I think we all know the impact they're having on people's mental health and well-being, as well as the impact on the wider economy. And I'll hand over to Jason to say a bit more.
I think the only thing I would add is to underline that we can reassure you that that broad harm from the response to COVID is as important to us as the response to COVID itself. Of course, we have to reduce the prevalence and the harm directly from those who are suffering from it. There are 76 people admitted to intensive care with this disease in the last 7 days. That's the same as the 7 days before. We have still got intensive care almost double where we had it pre-pandemic levels. So we shouldn't lose sight of that. At the same time, we have a chief economist, we have a chief social researcher with teams of people who are looking at the global literature about what lockdown, what response to COVID does, and mental illness is, of course, one of them. It's why schools are back first, because the research says those who suffer most are the youngest in your society over the medium to long term. And that's how we're making those choices in our advice, feeding that up into the decision makers.
Lewis Mickey from Bauer.
Thank you, First Minister. Yesterday, Derek Provan from AGS Airports said that he believes the aviation industry isn't a priority for the Scottish Government and there isn't a plan for it. What do you make of that? And then, if I may, can you offer any hope to Scottish football fans hoping to get down to England, down to Wembley to see the team play England in June, or is that something that's probably looking unlikely?
Well, I've got my resident football expert here, but suffice to say, I want to be in a position, if at all possible, to go to Wembley in June to cheer on Scotland against England. So I certainly do not want to take away people's hope for that. Can I give an absolute cast iron 100% guarantee? No, I can't on that any more than I can on anything else right now. But I certainly hope that we can be in a position to be doing that, and I hope we then come away from Wembley feeling really upbeat and positive as well. On aviation, it's not the case that aviation, is not a priority. I want to see aviation operational again as quickly as possible. I want to see our airports busy and people being able to go on holiday and travel for other purposes as well as quickly as possible. What is a priority, though, as we go through this next difficult phase to make sure that we come out of it without the risk of another lockdown, is that we don't allow new variants of this virus to be imported into the country. If you remember before Christmas, we were having a difficult time with the virus again. It had started to circulate more quickly, so we had more restrictions. But then, just before Christmas, this new variant was identified that was much more transmissible, and that changed everything. So I had to stand here with Jason and Gregor literally the weekend before Christmas Day and put the brakes on and effectively put the country back into lockdown. That was a punch to the stomach, because we thought, we were having a tough winter, but that we would come out of that. That changed everything. So new variants of this virus, and it is a virus that is mutating, can change everything very quickly. And the dread that I would have right now is that there's a new variant, comes into the UK or comes into Scotland, starts to circulate widely before we manage to pick it up, and it's got the ability to undermine the effectiveness of the vaccines. And we see some concern with the South African variant, which is not transmitting within Scotland so far. We see some concerns that it is undermining the efficacy of the vaccines. So we've got to guard against that, or no matter everything else we're doing right now, we risk setting ourselves backwards and tipping ourselves into potentially a third wave of this. So that's the priority. And I know the impact that has on aviation, and I deeply regret that. But I can't ignore that risk, because if we allow that to happen, then all bets are off for everything. And that is not something we can take the chance of.
So the serious answer to your question is we, of course, can't predict what crowds will be in that second week in June. The flippant answer is that the UK government chose the 21st of June because that's 3 days after the game, and they don't want the tartan army to travel. But that headline is not what I seek you to write. I am desperate to go. I really hope that by then travel will be allowed, crowds will be allowed, and vaccination and studying the new variants is how we get to that point, whether it's a football match or whether it's all the pubs and hospitality questions that we've had up to now. So I look forward to going to that game, but only if it's safe for us to do it.
Thanks. Gina Davison from The Scotsman.
Hi, First Minister, can you hear me? Right, great, okay, thank you. Can I ask, the UK government has announced a £700 million spend on summer schools and other initiatives to help children catch up, basically, on schooling that they've missed this year, given the pandemic. There'll probably likely be bad consequences from that, I would think. Is that the kind of area that you could see your government spending money on over the summer period? And can I also ask a question? We have been speaking to hoteliers, like others have, about the route map. The Moor of Rarach Hotel, which is just outside of Pitlochry, has just 5 bedrooms. Today, they have taken 5 cancellations. They say that the cost of keeping their place running is something around £5,000 a month. The government grant is £2,000 a month. I just wondered what you would have to say to them and others like them in that situation.
I've tried to be straight with people, so I didn't say to any business that it was safe to start taking bookings. I hope that it will be soon, but that's the reason, because I don't want businesses to be in a position where I'm giving them a date that I can't back up at the moment and then going back on that and them having to cancel. So that's why I'm trying to be as clear as I can be, as quickly as I can be. And I'm not going to repeat everything I've said here about what I hope will happen as we get to that latter stage of April onwards. And we will, as we go through the next weeks, add to the clarity that we've already been able to give as much as we possibly can. And I desperately I'm sorry for any business in the situation that you've just described. I don't want a single business to be living with these restrictions longer than is necessary. And for people who agree with my decisions, people who don't agree with my decisions, I would just, I suppose, chuck this point out there for consideration. Why would I keep a hotel closed for a day longer than necessary? What possible motivation do I have for doing that? I'm First Minister. I get judged on the state of the economy as I get judged on everything else. I want the economy to start working again. I want people to be back at work. I want things to be open. I want the country to be back to normal. So I've got no motivation, no incentive. There's not a fibre of my being wants one single restriction to be in place for longer than is necessary. So if I'm not giving certainty that you want, then you maybe are really frustrated about that, and you maybe fundamentally disagree with the basis for my decision. But the one assurance I would give you is, and the one ask I suppose I would make of you, is don't think that I'm doing it for anything other than what I consider to be the best and the right reasons. On school funding, we announced last week or the week before, I can't remember which it was right now, we announced further funding for school catch-up, education catch-up, and we will continue to look at what more we can do. So the money that has already been given to local authorities for this can be used for summer provision if they think that is appropriate. It is likely, although I don't know yet, that the money that's been announced in England today is already part of our assumed consequentials, so will already have been allocated through the decisions we've made around school funding, but we'll continue to keep these things under very close and ongoing review. Helen Puttett from The Times.
Thanks very much. Thank you very much. I wondered if I could ask if you can give a little bit more clarity on a date a bit sooner, which is the 15th of March, when we know that many secondary school pupils will be going back to school, but not if they will be getting full-time education. It was just at least some education, I think he said yesterday. And we also know that perhaps they won't all be in then, that some will have to wait. In fact, after the Easter holidays, which would be April 19th, just a week actually before the opening of the economy on the 26th. So are you able to tell us which pupils will go back to school on the 15th of March, which will have to wait till the 19th, how much education they will get, and how that 1 week break between the 19th and the 26th meets this idea of seeing what happens as pupils return before taking the next step? Thank you.
No, I'm not going to do that right now. I will do that next Tuesday. I said all along that we would set out on the 2nd of March what the next phase of school return would be, and that's the process we're going through right now. So in summary, I want to get as many young people back to school in that second phase from the 15th of March as possible, and we're going through the work right now with our clinical advisors to determine just exactly what that means. What I said yesterday is that we really hope that will be the remaining years of primary school, and also I hope a significantly increased number of secondary school pupils that are at least having blended learning, so that are back at school some of the time, even if they're not back full time. But in terms of the proportion of that, that's the work we are going through and doing properly and responsibly right now. And I'll set that out once we've concluded that next week. And if there is then a requirement for a third phase of school opening from the start of April, and obviously the Easter holidays vary. Some of the local authorities have earlier Easter holidays, but we take all of that into account. But right now, if you forgive me, I'm focused on, and we are all focused on, trying to maximise what we are able to achieve for young people back in school by the 15th of March. Simon Johnson from The Telegraph.
Thank you, First Minister. On travel, when the stay-at-home message ends on April the 5th, will that be replaced by stay within your council area again or something else? Just following up from your answer to Ross Govans, where you said that you hoped from the end of April that the Scotland-wide restrictions on travel could be lifted, although not international travel, but you didn't mention travel within the UK. I just wondered if you anticipate that to end at the same time as inter-Scotland travel or at a later point. And just briefly on the salmon inquiry, there seems to be some people, including some people within your own party, who believe what happened with Mr. Salmon's evidence is essentially a cover-up, and I wondered what you would say to them. Thank you.
I've already covered that. The issues with a particular single piece of evidence yesterday is a matter between the Parliament and the Crown Office, and I'm not party to those discussions, and nor should I be. And I'll say very, very firmly, I understand politics. I've been in politics for a long time. I understand oppositions wanting to hold governments to account and also to engage, as we all do, in the cut and thrust of politics. But let's all be careful here that we don't start signing up to false, damaging conspiracy theories that have no basis in fact, that start to actually unfairly undermine trust in our public institutions. The idea that any decision of the Crown Office around what they do to uphold or enforce the law is politically driven or influenced is just downright wrong, and nobody who is responsible, I think, should be making that claim. And as I've said before, this is about one element of evidence that I don't think inhibits what I can be asked about, and I don't see why it inhibits Alex Salmond's ability to sit before that committee. He's put reams of evidence before that committee, much of it, well, I'll say what I think of it when I get to the committee myself. There's no reason why he can't, there's no reason why he isn't sitting, no good reason in my view why he isn't sitting in front of the committee right now. I understand he said he'll go later in the week. Let's hope he does, and then we can get all of it out in the open, all of it onto the table. I'll have my say next week, and then people can make up their own minds. And in the meantime, and after that, I'll go on with my job. And the first part of your question, obviously I can't say this with certainty right now, but I hope that we would, as prevalence goes down in Scotland and in England, then in time, travel restrictions between Scotland and the rest of the UK won't be necessary, just as travel restrictions within Scotland won't be necessary. Obviously, that's a two-way street because, you know, I don't know what England will decide to do in terms of the UK government, but I would hope that that will prove unnecessary. But I can't say for sure yet exactly when that will end. There's also the issue that we have different policies at the moment about international travel, and that has to be taken into account because I do think, unfortunately, international travel restrictions may be required for a bit longer because of the issues I've already set out about new variants.
Sorry, can I just check as well on the, I mentioned when stay-at-home finishes on April the 5th, will that be replaced by stay within the council area?
Again, I don't know for certain right now. I would hope that we would be able to loosen that a bit. Now, as Jason said earlier on, it may be that, you know, we go to bigger areas, so health board areas, or we may feel we can lift travel restrictions within Scotland more widely than that. But in the same vein of not standing here giving commitments before I've got the data to actually back up those commitments, I can't be any more certain than that. Christine Lavelle from The Sun.
Thank you, First Minister. It was just to follow up on Helen Puttick's question on schools. Can you just be a bit clearer about when you aim for the full return to be completed? Because the 5th of April date that you announced yesterday falls in the Easter holidays for all of Scotland. And John Swinney has said that the holidays won't be moved. So will you tell children, parents and teachers now that they won't all be back until after the Easter holidays? And also, just how can you justify closing schools again for one day, if not more, for the election at the start of May?
Look, as I keep saying, elections are really not down to my decision alone. You know, I'm being accused a lot at the moment of living in a one-party state, which is rubbish and everything. But election decisions are not just about me. Returning officers decide how elections are conducted, whether they happen in schools or community centres or whatever. And I'm focused at the moment, as is John Swinney, on trying to get to a position where as many young people are back in school on the 15th of March. And then when we know what that will be, we'll be able to say what that means for others going beyond that. But I'm not going to go beyond that today because we're still engaged in that work. Adele Merson from the P&J.
Thank you, First Minister. You have said that decisions will be driven by data, not dates. The latest figures show Aberdeen's positivity rate is the lowest in mainland Scotland at around 24 cases per 100k. That's in comparison to Glasgow, where it's around 142 per 100k and a Scottish average of around 100 per 100k. Do you think it's proportionate to keep areas with level 2 rates in full lockdown for another 2 months?
So at the moment, until we better understand what happens when we start lifting restrictions with the new variant, I think it's proportionate at the moment. We wouldn't be doing it if we didn't think it was proportionate. We have a legal obligation to be proportionate in these restrictions. And that's the challenge. So Aberdeen's rates, just like Glasgow's rates, and they are variable, but they're all where they are right now because of lockdown restrictions. So as we start to ease things, you know, and schools have partially gone back in Aberdeen, so we have to look in Aberdeen just as we have to look in Glasgow. What impact is that going to have before we start lifting other restrictions? But we do want to get back to a position as